Hey everyone, welcome to Wisdom Wednesday. I'm Pastor Bob Piccola from Lehigh Valley Worship Center, and I want to welcome you to another Wisdom Wednesday. We've been talking for the last few weeks about the Tabernacle of David, and we really have gone beyond the tabernacle and gone back, way back in fact, to where the actual Ark of the Covenant was taken and captured by the Philistines. We've been in 1 Samuel chapter 4, and we know up to this point that Israel was at war with the Philistines. The Philistines had a battle with them, and they won. And they killed about 5,000 of the Israelites. So the Israelites thought, well, let's do this great thing. Let's get the Ark of the Covenant and bring that into battle, and perhaps God will be on our side. And so they did, and they had the priests come, which is what they were supposed to do. They were supposed to the priests were supposed to carry the ark with them, but the priests were, we know, were Hophni and Phinehas, and we know Hophni and Phinehas were some pretty bad guys. And so, because of their lack of respect and their lack of reverence for the presence of God, when they brought the ark into battle, the ark was captured. And the Philistines then again beat the Israelites in battle and killed another 30,000 men. So it was a complete disaster for the people of God, for the Israelites. So some bad things happen here in 1 Samuel chapter 4. First, the ark is captured. Second, the sons of Eli are killed, which are the priests. Okay, so the priests were priests who were supposed to supervise the ark. They were killed in battle. Now Blakey, who was a theologian, said this, that Hophni and Phinehas apparently died as they had lived in the very act of dishonoring God, and that's what you get when you dishonor God. So let's go back to Samuel chapter 4. We're in verse 12. And we'll read from 12 to 18. This is the section that we're going to deal with today. So it says this in verse 12. That same day a Benjamite, and this is after the ark is taken, and this is after Hophni and Phinehas were killed. That same day a Benjamite ran from the battle line and went to Shiloh with his clothes torn and dust on his head. When he arrived, there was Eli. Eli, we know, was the priest, the mentor, and the father of Hophni and Phinehas. And Eli was really the mentor of Samuel. So it says, there was Eli sitting on his chair by the side of the road, watching, because his heart feared for the ark of God. When the man entered the town and told what had happened, the whole town sent up a cry. Eli heard the outcry and asked, what is the meaning of this uproar? The man hurried over to Eli, who was 98 years old and whose eyes had failed so that he could not see. He told Eli, I have just come from the battle line. I fled from it this very day. Eli asked, what happened, my son? The man who brought the news replied, Israel fled before the Philistines, and the army had suffered heavy losses. Also, your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured. When he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backwards off his chair by the side of the gate. His neck was broken and he died, for he was an old man and he was heavy, and he led Israel 40 years. So all these bad things are happening, and just when you think it can't get any worse, it does. Eli dies. Okay? So it's interesting. It says, a man of Benjamin ran from the battle line that same day and came to Shiloh. Now the battle was fought near Aphek, which chapter 4 verse 1 talks about, and it was at least 20 miles from Aphek to Shiloh. So the messenger had a long way to go. The route was mostly uphill. Kind of reminds you of what your parents used to say. You know, when I was a kid, I used to walk 20 miles to school one way uphill in the snow. So you can kind of imagine that same story happening here. But he had a long way to go. The route was mostly uphill, and he had very bad news to carry. Because the news was so bad, the scripture says that he came with his clothes torn and dirt on his head. That's very specific language. It wasn't that he was just distressed and that he looked like he had gone for a long time. His clothes were torn and his head was and he had dirt on his head. That's a traditional Jewish sign of mourning. That's that sackcloth and ashes type of thing. The messenger brought the bad news, and he let his appearance reflect, basically, how bad the news was. Now, here's an interesting story. I don't know how true this is, and I'm not teaching it as truth, but I'm teaching it according to Jewish tradition. According to Jewish tradition, this unnamed Benjamite was a very young Saul. So we don't know how true that is or not. We know Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. It could be interesting if that were true. That would be pretty cool. But anyway, just a little tidbit. But, so what we see happen here, Eli is sitting on the wayside watching. His heart is trembling for the ark of God, and rightfully so. He's concerned about the ark. He's concerned more about the fate of the ark than the fate of his sons. His sons have been a scourge to him. And he already knows, it's already been prophesied to him. We don't know who the prophet was. Maybe it was Samuel. We're not exactly sure. But it was prophesied to Eli that his sons would die in battle. So he already knew that was going to happen. And he probably imagined it was going to happen in this battle. But he never imagined for a moment that the ark, that the presence of God, would actually be taken from them. Okay, so, you know, sometimes you just know in your spirit that something is wrong. Sometimes you just sense that decision that you made or that thing that you're doing, it's just wrong. And Eli has that. So we go back to the story. The messenger tells him the story of bad to worse, to worser than that, right? Israel fled before the Philistines. That's bad. This is what the word says. Israel has fled before the Philistines. There's your bad. And there has been a great slaughter among the people. There's your worse. Also, your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead. That's the worser. And the ark of God has been captured. That's the worser than worse. So there's 4 bad things that happen here. And it just becomes too much for Eli. He falls off, he falls backward, breaks his neck, and he dies. Okay, and particularly when it's mentioned about the Ark of God. So, but then that's not the end of the tragedy, unfortunately. More happens here in verse 19. Let's take a look. Verse 19 says, Now his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child, due to be delivered. And when she heard the news that the ark of God was captured and that her father-in-law and her husband, Phinehas, had died, she bowed herself, and gave birth, for her labor pains came upon her. And about the time of her death, the woman who stood by her said to her, Do not fear, for you have borne a son. But she did not answer, nor did she regard it. She named the child Ichabod, saying, The glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God has been captured, and because her father-in-law, her husband, and she said, her father-in-law and her husband, and she said, The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured. So Phinehas hears the death of her husband, her brother-in-law, and her father-in-law. She hears about the slaughter, the 30,000 and the loss of the battle, and she also hears about the capture of the Ark of the Covenant. I think it's interesting that she hears about these things and she doesn't get upset about it, but she mentions about the Ark being taken. So there's something in her about the presence of God that's still on fire, that's still aflame. And so the anguish is too great, and the labor pains come upon her. She has a child, she ignores the child, she lets the child go, basically, and she names the child Ichabod. And this is a real reflection of her anguish and the national tragedy upon Israel. She names the child Ichabod, meaning the glory has departed from Israel. Actually, the proper interpretation and the proper tense of this Hebrew word Ichabod is, where is the glory? What happened to the glory? So there's a real sense of mourning and a real sense of loss here. Now you have to ask the question, did the glory depart? We know the glory has departed, but here's the question. Did the glory depart because the ark was captured, or was the ark captured because the glory had departed? That's a good question to ask, and it's a question that we have to ask ourselves all the time. Had the glory of God truly departed? In one sense, yes, it had. And the glory of God left a long time ago. The glory of God left Israel when Israel stopped repenting and trusting God and started treating the presence of God and the ark of God as a superstition, superstitious trust in the ark itself. And so that's what happens when we as Christians, when we as the people of God start handling the things of God as a superstition, and we lose our reverence. Ellison says this: the glory of God had indeed departed, but not because the ark of God had been captured. The ark had been captured because the glory had already departed from Israel. Very intense, very sad moment for Israel. It's a very intense and sad moment for us when the glory departs from us, when the glory departs from our churches. Tragically, the same could be said of many of our churches today, many of our ministries and our individual Christian lives. The glory has departed. Where is the glory in our lives? There's still priests, there's still tabernacle, but God is not enthroned in glory among them. There is a form of godliness without the power. Isn't that what the Apostle Paul says in 2 Timothy? 2 Timothy 3:5, it says, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. Then he says, have nothing to do with such people. Some of us, it's been written over us, Ichabod. Some of our churches, it's been written Ichabod. Some of our movements that were very strong and very popular, it's been written Ichabod. Many ministries, many individual Christian lives, the glory has departed because of our lack of reverence, our lack of respect for the presence of God, and for our inability to break away from ourselves, to break away from our tradition, and move into the things that God has for us. If we treat the presence of God, and I'll close with this, if we treat the presence of God with disrespect, like Hophni and Phinehas did, and have no regard for holiness and purity, like the word said about them, if we treat God's glory like some secular superstition, it's just a matter of time before we lose the glory, in the presence of God in our lives. That's a sad thing. I pray for you that never happens. I pray for you as individuals. I pray for your churches, that the glory of God would remain strong, that in our worship times that we would sense and know that weight, that presence, that strength of God's presence in our worship times. Do you agree with me? Do you believe in that? That's my prayer for you today. We at Living Lehigh Valley Worship Center would love to invite you out. I'll tell you what, we have some really intense times of worship in our Sunday services, in our Saturday deeper services. And I'd like to invite you out. If that's something that's strong in your heart, if worship is something that you want to see restored and that you want to take place in, feel free. Come visit us Sunday morning. We are located at 1555 Linwood Street in Bethlehem. We meet in the Congregation Beth El Gibor Synagogue. It's a nice relationship we have. They meet on Saturdays, we meet on Sundays. And so we have a good time there. But I want to invite you out. We start at 10 o'clock. Come on out. Worship the Lord. Sense His greatness. Sense His presence. Sense His holiness. Get restored to that right relationship again with God. We'd love to have you. God bless you. Thanks for listening. See you again. Bye-bye.